From 1795 until its overthrow and eventual colonization by the U.S. military in 1893, the Kingdom of Hawaii ruled independently under the governance of the House of Kamehameha. This nation would eventually become the state that many people see as a tropical paradise, inviting millions of tourists a year to relax beachside on the islands of Hawaii. However, when American businesses looked at Hawaii, they saw not a tropical paradise, but an opportunity for tropical cash crops, with devastating results. But before I dive into the history of colonial agriculture in Hawaii, I want to get a few things off my chest. First, I'm not Hawaiian, nor do I claim to represent the voice or opinions of indigenous Hawaiians. I'm simply attempting to relay historical information accurately here. Second, I'm not saying that this is the only issue with Hawaiian relations to the US. This is simply one of many. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the video. This is For the Future of Us All: Conspiracy, the devastating impacts of colonial agriculture in Hawaii.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is mounting.
Before we get into the video, I'd love it if you guys would hit the like button and subscribe. Maybe even hit the notification bell. It really helps me understand what kind of videos you guys like and are looking for, so thanks. So first we'll discuss briefly the history of colonial agriculture in Hawaii, and then we'll discuss the two major issues I see with it today: GMOs and massive off-island land holdings. On the second bit, it's not completely to do with agriculture, it's just a lot of it is agriculture. Colonial agriculture began its impact at the statewide level in Hawaii with the corporations once known as the Big Five. The result of nearly a century of small sugar production, the Big Five really hit their stride in 1875 with the signing of the Reciprocity Treaty. This treaty allowed for duty-free trade between the U.S. and the Kingdom of Hawaii of sugarcane. And this sent shockwaves through the industry, consolidating the power effectively into the hands of the Americans. This wasn't slight either, with the sugar production plantations falling from 79 to 20 from 1875 to 1883. The Big Five were the agencies responsible for this change. These agencies were Castle and Cooke, Alexander and Baldwin, C. Beaver and Company, American Factors, and Theo H. Davies and Company. The biggest issue, however, with the early colonial agriculture was not the consolidation of power within American companies, but the political power that came with them. This power grew such that the Attorney General Edmund Pearson Dole, himself a descendant of the infamous missionary Dole family, and again himself a major supporter of the westernization and colonization of Hawaii, felt that the Big Five's power was too much, referencing them as a de facto oligarchy in disapproval. This probably had a lot to do with them challenging his power, much more than it had to do with any indigenous rights, but still the point stands. At the height of the Big Five's power, however, the United States effectively annexed the Kingdom of Hawaii into the Union, and this was done in a coup d'etat overthrow of Queen Liliuokalani in 1898, which immediately was responded to by a petition from the Hawaiian people to re-establish the monarchy. However, with the start of the Spanish-American War, Hawaii had become an essential naval base and a refueling base, and in the same year, Congress passed a resolution annexing the islands as an American territory. At this time as well, the Dole Plantation and others like it were catching on to the growing interest of Hawaiian culture, and by the mid-20th century were producing massive amounts of fruit, with pineapple production peaking in 1955 with 76,700 acres planted. And this massively successful industrial production, along with a rising claim once more to Hawaiian independence in 1959, The US held a special election to annex Hawaii once more, but this time as a state. However, it should be noted that this vote was quite rigged, as not only did white settlers already outnumber indigenous Hawaiians, there were only options for either Hawaii to stay a US territory or become a fully fledged state, and clearly no option available for Hawaiian independence, which, if you can't tell by now, was never really an option. There's obviously much more to the Hawaiian history of agriculture. It was brutal and colonial in nature, but now let's transition to look at the two biggest issues with colonial agriculture today in Hawaii: GMOs and the off-island land holdings. GMOs have replaced what was massive sugarcane and pineapple plantations. The islands have hosted some massive GMO projects over the years, most of which you've probably never noticed by looking at what's stocked at your local grocery store. And today, seed crops dominate the once tropical landscape. While GMOs didn't even make it to Hawaii until the mid-90s, with the year-round growing season, Hawaii was quick to host GMO crops beginning in 1988. These early seed GMOs include corn, tomatoes, and cotton, all engineered for increased herbicide and insecticide resistance. And ever since this first testing fields, slowly nearly all of the seeds produced in Hawaii have become GMO. And this is backed by records held by the US Department of Agriculture showing that more and more permits for genetically engineered crop fields have been issued in Hawaii than anywhere else in the nation. And since field tests began in 1987, Hawaii's also seen the highest density of these test fields anywhere in the United States. Because of this overwhelming prevalence, Hawaii's agricultural landscape is now ran by 5 of the 6 largest agrochemical seed companies in the world, all of which would specialize in GMO crops. I point this out because too often we point out Monsanto as the key ingredient to the evil of GMOs and agrochemical companies, but there are 6 of them that we need to look out for, and Hawaii hosts 5 of them, so it's a bad ratio. And in reflection of the colonial fruit agriculture of the 20th century, almost none of the farming land in Hawaii produces for its inhabitants anymore, as over 88% of Hawaiian food still has to be imported to the islands. But to be critical of my perspective, a common pro-GMO argument seen especially regarding Hawaii are examples such as the Papaya Crisis. Okay, I don't know why I said such as Hawaii. This was in Hawaii, specifically Hawaii. See, in 1937, the first examples of papaya ring spot virus appeared on the island of Oahu. The virus eventually threatened the market enough to drive the entire transition of papaya production from Oahu to the island of Hawaii in the 60s. And by 1994, the ring spot virus was seriously hampering even Big Island production, cutting back over 50% of total papaya export. And 4 years later, in 1998, the FDA approved the genetically engineered rainbow and sunup papayas for mass production due to their resistance to the destructive virus. And yeah, I love rainbow papayas, who doesn't? But this is a big but here. While GMO papayas may be yummy and even useful for some Hawaiian farmers, this is a tiny percentage of what GMOs are really. And also, these farmers producing the rainbow and sunup papayas have to give out portions to the companies in which produced the genetically modified seeds in the first place, so it's only a tiny win. What's really on the island is this: over 90% of all GMO crops grown in the state account for just soy and corn, both of which, I probably don't need to tell you this, are not native to Hawaii. Not that any GMOs are native, but stay with me here, I promise this is going somewhere. In essence, because of one successful papaya story, today in 2021, 99.998% of GMOs in the US are not... Wait, this can't be right. Wait, no, that actually makes sense. Yeah, no. Not papayas. We barely use them or eat them. They're really expensive. They're like $7. See, the real purpose of GMOs in America is to make produce okay with getting sprayed by herbicides and insecticides like this? Scary, huh? In Kauai, often referenced as the Garden Island, a true paradise, seed companies sprayed over, quote, 18 tons of acutely toxic, restricted use pesticides, unquote. These restricted products have been linked to contamination of groundwater, leading to, among others, neurological damage, damage to the central nervous system, and damage to internal organs. And you may be wondering, say if you live near crops like myself, are you subject to similar effects? And I can almost guarantee you the answer is no. Seed to grow in Hawaii requires, quote, 17 times more restricted use insecticides than on the mainland. And who feels the results of this extra spray? Hawaiians, who also, remember, rarely are able to profit off this pollution, like mainland companies, which themselves don't have to feel the effects. Just a reminder, this is a state hosting over 25,000 unique species. And besides GMOs, the islands have seen another colonial acquisition in the form of land grabs. When viewing a modern map of any island in Hawaii, but say Oahu, it's impossible not to notice the massive percentage of land owned by massive shareholdings. And yes, some on this map are national parks or other land protection programs. And as you can honestly see, nothing much more needs to be said about Hawaiian land grabs. Yes, there's a Navy base in Honolulu, and yes, it's not going anywhere. But some of this land could still be very much turned over to indigenous Hawaiians, and it should. An island nation independent in the Pacific should no longer be owned mostly by American mainland interests. It's not that Hawaiians aren't American, they certainly are. But we also must recognize that there's something more and something deeper in Hawaii that exists. And a great first step is recognizing and returning ancestral and sacred land to indigenous Hawaiians. And now, with a brief understanding of the agricultural history of Hawaii alongside some impacts GMOs have had along the way, we can better move to create a world where exploitation isn't necessitated for economic prosperity. That's just our opinion, however, what's yours? What solutions do you see to both of the issues? And for the future of us all, we better get educated and find solutions.